Welcome to the FML podcast, the podcast on a mission to uncover actionable insights, explore the latest trends, and to catalyze your fintech's growth. Join Growth Gorilla's founder and managing director, Shameer Sachdev, and some of fintech's hardest hitting marketers and leaders.
Welcome everyone to today's episode of the FML podcast. Today we're joined by Andrea Linehan, Global Chief Marketing Officer at Currency Fair. Andrea, thanks for joining us today.
Hi Shameer, I'm delighted to be here.
Could you just share a little bit about yourself and your journey so far?
I'm originally from Ireland, and actually I wasn't a marketer by trade. I had actually come through the finance and accounting track, but then had taken myself off to the Middle East after college and just completely randomly fell into sales and marketing and realized that I had a bit of a knack for it and a love for it, more importantly. Spent 10 years in the Middle East, mostly working in the destination management and integrated tourism destination sectors. I moved back to Ireland then and found myself exposed to the surgence of fintech. So I moved into fintech first with a peer-to-peer lending company, a domestic one out of Ireland. And then I moved into the company I'm in now, which is Currency Fair, as you'd mentioned.
Out of curiosity, when you say you landed in the sales and marketing, did you land into sales first, then marketing, or marketing and then sales?
It was actually the combination. That the very first role was a head of sales and marketing for an inbound tourism company. So it was very much the hybrid. It was a startup actually. So despite being responsible for sales and marketing, it was also operations, customer care, the product development. It was a bit of everything. The reality is when you're in a small company, a startup with very little marketing budget, as a marketer, you've no choice but to put your sales hat on, because a lot of the times you really only have your own voice and your own physical ability to get out there and get customers in the door. So that's how it started.
It's not too dissimilar from my background. I was a broker first, which is quite sales heavy. And then I came in to look after the sales team for a trading platform, and we needed leads. They had no marketing. They had a marketing department. Wasn't much going on there, and I ended up just commandeering it because it was under the control of the CEO, who was a horrendous marketer. And I thought, well, I can't do any work. So I was like, leave it to me. I'll try and just do something with
Figure
this.
it out, yeah.
Yeah. And that was like 10, 12 years ago, and somehow I now run an agency. So, so tell us about Currency Fair. First and foremost, what is Currency Fair? What do you guys do? And then, tell us a little bit more about your role as CMO over there.
For those of you who would know TransferWise, that's now Wise. Currency Fair actually would have been the precursor to Wise. So we would have been one of those first movers. We were the actual company that coined the peer-to-peer marketplace, where Shameer, you and I could literally exchange currencies amongst ourselves, and we wouldn't be charged a margin on that, just like the banks or a Wise does. We would purely be charged a platform fee or transaction fee. So that's actually how Currency Fair started. It then evolved to provide real-time currency exchange, which is now more typical. And TransferWise had actually followed the very same path slightly after us. Big difference between Currency Fair and Wise is they raised very big money. And as we know, when you are a consumer fintech, big marketing budgets is an absolute must, or forget about it. That's the difference in our journeys and why, even though Currency Fair has got a strong brand, particularly in the UK, actually it's our biggest market, Europe and Asia, we wouldn't quite compete with the Wise. But we had since then pivoted to focus more on the B2B side, and in particular to leaning into our technology so that we would instead become the engine for payments companies like a Wise. And actually that's why I was brought on board. One, to sustain the consumer side of our business, which was essentially a cash cow. We had a very loyal base of customers, but then to build our B2B offering. And that was everything from scratch, because lead gen from a consumer perspective versus lead gen from a business perspective is a very different proposition and play. The marketing technologies, the team, the talent, the strategy, the processes are, while there can be overlaps, they're very different. And that's what I was brought in to do.
Are you still actively marketing and trying to grow Currency Fair, or has all focus been switched over to the B2B side?
No, both are very much being kept alive, for want of a better word. What ended up happening was we ended up acquiring a B2B payments company out of Australia, which is called Zai, Z-A-I. That essentially catapulted our move into the B2B technology space. That's how we have two brands within the one group. Currency Fair, although we do serve businesses with currency exchange needs, it's predominantly consumers. But on the Zai side, then it's very much where the payments engine behind other big institutions like a Wise or any type of company or sector that moves money within their platform, we're an engine behind that type of company. So it's very much about the two brands. The future for us is B2B, there's no doubt, the technology side. But whilst there's still value in Currency Fair, we'll certainly be sweating that.
You're in a unique position where you're kind of on both the B2C side and the B2B side. What are the core differences that you see, between, marketing the B2C brand and versus marketing the B2B offering?
If I think about the customer themselves, the buyer and the decision makers, with a consumer, all of those things is the one person for the most part, assuming that they're not necessarily conferring with a partner or family. They're essentially the decision maker, the researcher, they're everything to do with that particular product or service that they're about to buy into. On the B2B side, you can have multiple people involved in a buying decision, and that can be incredibly complex. You could have 10, 15, 20 people, either directly or indirectly involved in that decision, or it could even be 3, 4, 5 people. But either way, it creates a lot of complexity in terms of personalization, communication, cadence, speed of the sales cycle, or lack of speed of the sales cycle, because you're trying to satisfy a number of people's desires and needs. And in particular, when those people are working in a business, either they own that business or they're an employee, they've got their own individual needs, personal needs as that employee or business owner, and then they've got their professional needs and desires. So you have a lot of considerations in terms of getting a positive decision to be made. Complexity is definitely the big differentiator, I believe.
How does that then manifest sort of operationally, internally for you? Do you have two separate teams within the marketing department, one that focuses on the B2C side, one that focuses on the B2B side, or do they overlap considerably?
This was a really interesting part of our merger. The B2B company did have a very small nascent marketing team in place. And then I had a much larger team in the consumer business, which would be typical. You would typically tend to have bigger teams for consumer business. Even though we had raised money at that time also, so we had a beefier marketing budget and I was able to expand the team, it was not going to be big enough for me to be able to put a line down the middle and be able to satisfy all the generalist and specialist needs of a consumer business and also have the equivalent over on the B2B side. So to begin with, I had to build a team which was a mixture of generalists and specialists, but also then was a mixture of B2C and B2B, and operate an almost centralized services model for both of these brands. So where possible, overlap or processes or technologies. So for instance, HubSpot is a perfect example. How I was using HubSpot for Currency Fair versus how I was using it for Zai was different, but I was at least able to use the one HubSpot account and just create two different instances. So I had economies of scale essentially for being able to leverage one marketing technology for both brands. But when it came to the team itself, I very much my senior team were generalists across both brands. And then depending on certain disciplines, whether it was lead gen through paid social or search, that's where I not only brought in specialists for that particular discipline, but also specialists for consumer and or business. So I just had to be very considered about what was critical in terms of specialisms, both in the discipline and then whether it was B2C or B2B. You could transition into bring in the AI stuff and say, have I been able to leverage any advancements? Or speaking of HubSpot and marketing technologies, how has that helped with Baby?
Leveraging marketing technology is really interesting. Have you been able to sort of introduce sort of any other technologies or AI or anything at all like that into your day-to-day across either B2C or B2B or both?
One of the other complexities around having people moving between two different brands, and it could be hour by hour throughout a day, particularly my generalists, the mental switching costs of that is really profound. And although I have built a team who probably have a strong propensity for that switching, it still is a challenge. One way to alleviate that is to at least bring familiarity amongst the technologies that you're using as much as possible. Because if you can avoid switching costs between the tools you're using, it means you've more room for switching between the creativity or the thought process required for thinking about a consumer versus a business. So as I mentioned earlier about HubSpot, for instance, the fact now that we use HubSpot as our centralized place for everything we do around our blog, our content, our lead generation system, particularly on the B2B side, even the B2B side that we have within Currency Fair, that means that all of my team are all in tuned into that one ecosystem. So that's definitely been one way. And then we've tried to replicate that in other systems or tools that we're using. So that would be best advice I'd give, is just keep your infrastructure as simple as possible and just really limit those times when switching is required.
How do you see technologies like AI, for example, contributing to marketing teams, marketing departments? Where do you think the sort of future lies with that?
I find it really interesting to see the behavior of marketers right now in all things AI. There's an absolute obsession with how can we use AI to make our jobs easier, to make our jobs faster. And there's no doubt whether it's optimization, automation, personalization, all of these things will improve massively and we'll get major efficiencies using AI. That's fine. But it's incredible how so many marketers are forgetting to think about what all of these tools or experiences or AI are going to do for our customer. What does it really mean for them? How is their behavior going to change? I definitely believe the narrative around those two needs to balance out a bit more. If I was to give advice, and I do give this advice to my own team and I take it myself, is we're going to be absolutely saturated with all of these AI enabled tools over the next few years, right? Every bit of our marketing technology stack that we use right now, there's already plugins and overlays that are being made available. We don't actually need to work very hard for that to just come to us. Shameer, we are the ones that hold the budget. Trust me, there's going to be salespeople banging down our doors to sell us every AI enabled tool possible. So if we just sit back and wait for the cream to rise to the top and then buy that, that would be my recommendation. But obviously educate yourself so you can understand it. And probably the one place that really marketers should be putting some upskilling attention to when it comes to AI is around prompt engineering, because these tools are only as good as the ability of the user and the education of the user. That's definitely an area where I think there's going to be major expectations around that being a critical skill, is prompt engineering for marketers. Search is obviously the major thing that marketers are talking about right now when it comes to AI. How do we leverage AI to create content, optimize it, all of that kind of good stuff? Going back to what does that mean for our customer behavior? Guarantees, Shameer, right now, if you were to go out and survey the general public, the number of people who are actually defaulting to any of the AI tools, the free ones, as their go-to search engine, tiny, absolutely tiny. So from an adoption curve perspective, we're barely scraping the early adopter phase of that. So we need to take a beat and just go only as fast or solve for as fast as our customers are doing. And don't forget that there's going to be a long time before the majority move away from Google or Bing. So not to forget about that. Know that it's going to be a very noisy market, a lot of AI tools out there. They'll come to us, don't worry, marketers. As long as you have the budget, they're coming to us. Second, prompt engineering, absolutely get a handle on that, know how to use these tools. And then third, do not forget about the customer and how it is or isn't changing their behavior, because our traditional methods are going to be still viable for a long time.
there was a period where there was a lot of agencies cropping up, and they were selling the we combine data science with search marketing fad. And they get data scientists to do some cool stuff. In reality, they were building JavaScript and then plugging that into Google. That was quite a big thing. And, a lot of the big brands started going after it. But actually, in the end, what I thought was quite funny was implementation of those sort of scripts weren't actually helping the end client. They were actually helping the agency become more efficient. Because at the end of it, if you as a client come to us as an agency and you give us a task or a project, you want the output and the outcome. How we do that, if I'm smart enough to automate it,
good for you.
Great, fantastic. That's great for us. That's great for our profit margin. But you as an end client, you don't really care if it's taking me, put 5 of my team on it or 1 to build a bit of script. We've seen a lot of those agencies, and there's one in particular, I won't mention any names, but the CEO kind of came out and went, actually, what we realized at the end of this all is that we're in the service business. And that kind of to your point around, how does that really impact the customer at the end of it all? Do they really care? I think, when you're in a situation where you perhaps got, say, AI behind, like, say, a customer service bot, and it's genuinely solving their issues and problems quicker and faster, then that's great. That's got to have an impact. But if you don't have the prompts and you don't have the information to serve, for your AI bot to then collect and then serve to your end user, you're not going to be a really, really, seasoned customer service employee at the end of it, because actually you're going to deliver an inferior service.
The indicators of what your customer wants and what they need will reveal itself without you needing to delve into any major research or focus groups. Because if ChatGPT or any of equivalents, which there are so many of right now, if you start getting a phone call from a salesperson saying, would you like to buy ad space on this tool because here's the search stats and here's the demographics of the customers using it, then there's something to consider. And you're like, all right, okay, this now is starting to move into a place where customers are using it and the evidence and the statistics are there to warrant it. Because we're, as marketers, Shameer, I find it hilarious. I always think of the gold rush. Who are the people who made the money? It was the guys selling the tools, the hammers and all of that stuff, not the people digging for the gold. And oftentimes marketers could be the ones buying those tools. We have to be very cognizant of what is it that we really need. If there's going to be efficiencies by using these tools, super, all day long. But efficiencies are being made in marketing technologies all the time. It's not just because AI is here. This just so happens to be an accelerator because all of a sudden media have picked it up and it's become, as if it's new and as if it's mainstream, but it's been around for so long.
The other point that you made was, talking about the general public. I think, marketers and then marketers that, that we all work in the fintech space, we do end up in a bit of this echo chamber. And, we're rushing around talking about ChatGPT and AI and all of this sort of stuff. But if you take the average person on the street that we're marketing to, most of them, if you turn around and said to them, we run search ads, they'll turn around and go, what do you mean? And you go, well, the ads at the top of Google? We do that. Oh, okay, fair enough. Anyway, they don't care that much about it. We're kind of sitting here and creating this huge storm around it all, when in reality, like you said, the early adopter phase, we're not even in the middle of that just yet. We're at such early stages. And it kind of brings me on to another question that I kind of want to, at a currency fair level, and kind of get your opinion on this, which is, you've talked about your competitor, you talked about Wise, you said that you were one of the first sort of early movers. How has kind of currency fair managed tech and trends and industry shifts to try and stay ahead of the curve?
Well, there's two sides of it, right? Because it's what we do from a product and service perspective versus what we're doing from a marketing perspective. And I'd argue it's far more important to be innovative, not even innovative, but staying on trend in what our product and service is. Because at the end of the day, to your very point about people not caring about ads on Google, they care about our product and service and the speed and consistency of delivery and quality of use, ease of use. That's what they care about. What can we do as marketers to make sure that we're always solving for their evolving needs? When it comes to what we do as marketers, communication being consistent, clear, and us following through on our words, so therefore being trustworthy. And this isn't just about being in financial services. That will never go away. The fundamentals will never go away for what we need to do from a marketing perspective. So actually, a lot of keeping up with industry trends is really, as you said, is what's happening from our business perspective in terms of efficiencies, lower cost for higher return, a better ROAS on anything we're using, a better return on talent spend. That's what keeping up to trends on all things happening in marketing will do. Customer behavior doesn't change a huge amount, but how they consume products and services also actually doesn't evolve at any rapid speed. But things like speed is something that they do expect more and more of. I think the whole business, including the marketers, needs to be hyper focused on what does it mean from the product and service, because even us as Currency Fair, we have stayed as a one-trick pony, being quite frank. That's where our sweet spot is. It's currency exchange in and out, and we've been adding new currencies, and that's lovely. But the likes of a Wise have gone out and become multi-product, multi-service. That wasn't marketing driven. That wasn't a marketing thing. That was a product service thing. Obviously, the marketing then had to adapt to speak to all the different types of customers now that was going to be attractive to. And then the bigger the customer base gets, the more complex the communication channels, the optimization, the personalization comes. And to be honest, the tools that are on the market now can solve for a lot of that. It's certainly not an answer of there's not really anything we can do or need to do. I think we're already doing it, but it's definitely consistency, without a doubt, is what our customers want. But why do they want that, Shameer? Because people are passive. They're generally like to avoid any type of work or switching costs, going back to that being a topic. So what they don't want is change, or change at a rapid pace. They don't want to feel it. They don't want to put in the work, because change is a painful thing. It's micro improvements, but consistency and meeting and managing expectations.
That's so true on the B2B side, right? I think that moves incredibly slowly. If you think about a lot of large, even medium-sized businesses, they'll adopt a particular product. The sales cycle has taken a period of time. They've then bought the product. They've got to then embed it in some way, shape, or form, get trained up on it. And then with all of these things, for the first 12 months, there's always teething problems with bugs and all of these sorts of things. You finally get that all nailed down. Do you really, really want to switch to a different provider, even if it is newer and fancier and all of this sort of stuff? No, you want your existing provider to just be consistent at that point then.
They don't want the gap, because what makes switching easier then is when the gap between the product you have and what their competitors are providing gets so big that is now no longer like than like. And actually, the value of moving far out exceeds the pain of moving. And that's the bit that you do need to pay attention to, because it's what's that adoption formula? It's value over effort. If that value is bigger than the effort, that's what makes people adopt change, and they'll do it faster the bigger that positive number is. But it flips the other way. They won't adopt, they won't change. And that's what we always got to keep an eye on.
I suppose our role as marketers is to then consistently communicate the value that our product is bringing to then maintain retention. How do you manage that Currency Fair at Zai?
Definitely on the consumer side with Currency Fair, it's a really interesting one, because this is a financial transaction that actually requires a lot of steps. And no matter whether it's us or a Wise, there are some steps because that can't be avoided, because the reality is, as much as we like to say fintech are revolutionizing the banking system, we still have to sit on it. Nothing happens without the banking system, right? So there's no getting away from that. So we can streamline our part of their journey as much as possible, but there are still going to be steps involved with moving money from banks into the fintech ecosystem. So what does that mean? Those steps and that journey is quite complex. And unless you're doing that day to day, that is going to be a very frustrating and time-consuming journey as the customer figures out what they need to do. One of the fundamental things that we can do, and it's so basic, but it blows my mind how many companies do this so badly, is that step-by-step, here's what you do, and removing the hard work for the customer in terms of figuring out how to do things. And I really think there's a lot of, particularly actually fintech and financial institutions, that there's a lot of room to increase their competitive edge if they can just remove those effort blockages that are there. And it's something as simple as somebody drafts an email explaining the next steps, but they forget one really tiny thing because there's an icon on that screen that all of a sudden just throws the consumer because it's not referred to in the email. And all of a sudden, you just have a consumer just put their hands up and they're like, oh, no, it's too much effort because now I'm not sure. And I don't want to send money if I'm not sure. I don't want to move money to this company if I'm not sure. And it can be as micro as that. Absolute epic attention to detail so that the customer never has a question in their mind, and or you can preempt the questions that are about to come into their mind. That is probably the most powerful thing you can do, because not only as marketers are we out communicating the value, that's the easy part. Oh, we're this time's cheaper and we're this fast. But if you can really focus on their full journey and just absolutely put the effort, it's bare minimal possible. You've got a golden equation then. But not enough companies, even the big ones, the big brands, don't pay attention.
100% agree with what you're saying. Just a sort of anecdote from running an agency. We've got an inquiry coming in and we want to move them obviously into receiving a proposal from us. Our conversion rate was okay, but it wasn't amazing. And I was speaking to a friend of mine and he went, how do you take the briefs? And I went, oh, I send them out a briefing document to get them to fill it in. And he went, no, don't do that. You can book a call and go through it together. I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And literally our conversion rate is just insane. Every single lead we were bringing in that did want a proposal, we were actually getting to deliver that. Reason for that, just removing that friction of, oh, I've got to go and fill this out myself, instead having a bit of a hand-holding throughout that process had a huge impact. The broking world, the currency trading world kind of cottoned onto that, in the early days when they had the old call centers and they were calling up with all the FX stuff and they were taking through the onboarding and kind of all of those bits and pieces. But I suppose as self-serve has now come along, it's now no longer sales job to usher them through that, it's marketing's job. I kind of want to move just sort of one step up in the funnel and just talk a little bit about content and copy. To your point around really becoming really, really focused on that friction point, how do you view content's role as part of that ecosystem and part of the customer journey?
Exceptionally important. One of the first things I did when I joined Currency Fair was build a content marketing function, but a very much outcome revenue driven function. We used to do actually a lot of our content in-house, but I actually moved that to work with a ecosystem of contractors, freelancers, and agencies, all doing very different things, because it's very hard to actually find one agency that can really do your top and middle of funnel, entertainment, edutainment, SEO type stuff, as well as somebody who is able to do your bottom of funnel products, content led, pain solving, solution solving type lead generation content. It is very unusual to find that kind of agency. And it's also very hard to hire in people who can also do those very different things, because they are very different. But one of the first things when we acquired Zai, I absolutely knew, with it being a very technical product, because this is payments infrastructure. It's months of integration, sometimes for a very complex integration. This is not just plug in the API and you're done. This is product and technology people on the customer side and on our side working together over a number of months. So what that meant is paying attention to the research journey that our customer and our buyer group within that customer are going to go under before they even get to a who do we pick up the phone to or look to actually talk to. So I engaged an agency, they're called Mint, based out of the UK, and they focus only on fintech and only on bottom of the funnel content. And their service is lead generation driven by content that brings in leads at bottom of the funnel. It is not this, here's the content, here's the output, now you guys go post it and here's our charge for the number of hours. It is very much, we work together, we meet week by week, we go through every lead that is coming through. The agency report on the leads that are generated from their content. That is a whole other kettle of fish in comparison to how content and copywriting is generally being used by most marketing teams or being done by most agencies, being quite frank. And that's where a competitive edge really is. And that is just demonstrating power of content when it's treated as a revenue generating asset that carries infinite value if it's maintained and sustained versus a cost output from marketing to just fill a social media post space or to put into an email or onto a website. It's night and day. Very much that's how we approach things, particularly on the Zai side, because it's actually even more important for on the B2B side and for technical products, is very much we are building assets that are going to hopefully work into perpetuity as long as we maintain and sustain them, but they should be throwing off value. And whenever possible, which is 90% of the time, we're able to attribute that to revenue because these leads have actually converted into paying customers. And if you hyper focus on that being the whole point of doing it, it's a game changer, Shameer.
It stops becoming about volume, right? And it's all about quality, ultimately speaking, then at that point.
Completely.
So I want to just move a little bit further up the funnel from the content piece. You've talked about, obviously, the importance of high quality content at the bottom of the funnel. Moving sort of slightly further up, what's the different approaches that you're taking with B2C versus B2B to drive awareness for the specific product offerings?
On the Currency Fair side, we've a very heavy emphasis on expatriates as our customer base. So we tend to focus a lot of our top of funnel content on living abroad, moving home from abroad, and all the pains and joys that come with that. So we find what's really lovely about that type of content, it's exceptionally easy to find a lot of topics to provide information, education, edutainment, or just pure entertainment. We definitely focus very heavily on that because it allows us to, in a sector that's very noisy and there's a lot of very heavy competition, sometimes what customers are then looking for, if they can't find anything in terms of pricing to differentiate you, you're all regulated by the same people, the speed times are the same. If everything else is more the same, then the last thing they're looking for is maybe for their gut to tell them or for them just to have this nice fuzzy feeling. I don't mean that to be condescending of what it is that we're trying to do as marketing, but this is where that brand sentiment, that brand association that people have, and just it feels good, because when you've run out of every other comparison option, sometimes does it feel good or does it not feel good really matters. So if a brand can demonstrate that they understand what's going on, the kind of life that you're living, so we've a very heavy understanding and knowledge of being expatriates. A lot of it driven by the fact that actually a lot of people that work with us are expatriates, have been expatriates. So we really talk about things that we know and understand. I definitely think that gives us the edge on the consumer side. But on the business side, very, very different. When we've done top of funnel on the B2B side, it has been much more heavily geared towards particular personas within those companies that are making up that buyer group, whether it is the product team, the technology team in particular, and thinking about what their sphere of world looks like. When that means from career advancement, what's happening in their industry, what are the things that they need to understand or learn or be exposed to, thrive within their job and in their company. That's definitely that we found is something, it's so very specific, right, to the professional life, as opposed to us talking about broader living, which we do on the consumer side. When I'm choosing where to put my budget, the top of funnel stuff in the B2B is very nice to have, but I'd rather put everything into the bottom of funnel side of things, and what's left over, and if we're really within excess, put it into top of funnel. Whereas on the consumer side, I tend not to be all in on bottom of funnel. I try and spread it out a bit more, just because I know the thought process and the behavioral and emotional journey that people go through to make decisions is different, whether they're in their consumer mindset and their private mindset versus their professional mindset. So that's how we've approached it.
So before we jump into the quick fire round, what's next for you? What's next for Currency Fair?
Definitely the future for our group is on the B2B side. So we'll be putting much more emphasis on expanding internationally. Right now with Zai, we're purely operating domestically in Australia, but the vision is to move into Asia, Southeast Asia to begin with, and then eventually make our way into Europe and across to the States. So that's definitely our big growth story that's ahead of us. Currency Fair, like I said, the future for us isn't on the consumer side, but it's a nice cash cow that is tipping away. The maintenance of that is obviously really important because we're certainly not complacent, but the future for us is B2B for sure.
Yeah, let's jump into the quick fire round. So what podcasts are you listening to right now?
I listened to quite a few, but the one I should call out now is the Innovation Show hosted by Aidan McCullen. I'm slightly biased because we were a sponsor of that show with the Zai brand last year, but the breadth and depth of authors that he has on there and experts is absolutely incredible. It would really blow your mind. But what's more interesting is Aidan really delves into the books. Not only does he read them, which a lot of hosts don't do, but it makes for a really compelling two-way conversation. So I'd highly recommend it.
What's your favourite fintech organisation or app?
I really love Lemonade, which is an insurance technology company. The reason I like them is even though fintech is supposedly very innovative, a lot of times it's really just the same services, the same business model, just really hyped up with tech. What Lemonade do differently is change fundamentally how insurance works. So essentially, instead of there being this, if you make a claim with your insurance, the insurance company misses out or loses out financially. So therefore, they're incentivized to not pay out. Whereas what Lemonade do is anything that doesn't get claimed gets sent to a group of charities. So the insurance company Lemonade doesn't actually benefit from not paying out. So they're not disincentivized from paying out. So what I really love is as a fintech, it has completely disrupted the business model as well as the distribution of that product and service through technology.
What books are you currently reading or would you recommend?
I've actually in the middle of reading Marginal to Mainstream by Helen Edwards. So a super book for marketers in particular that just really talks about the fringes and the opportunities for marketers and where we could be looking to step outside what's a very crowded market of sameness in terms of how people market. It's fascinating. Now I have to say I'm only a few chapters in, but already I am hooked. One to watch for sure.
My last question, what's the best bit of life advice you've ever received?
That following your passion is great life advice, but really, really bad career advice. I love that one because I remember being certainly in my 20s, and it was a big push towards do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Do what you love and you'll be rich. All this crap, quite frankly. And the moment somebody pointed that out to me, I stopped trying to look for what it is that I was passionate about as a means to make money. And instead, I leaned into what I'm excellent at, because that's really where you'll thrive in your professional life. And in your personal life, then what you're passionate about will just make you happy because that's what you're passionate about.
Andrea, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast today.
Really enjoyed it, Shameer.
The FML podcast is brought to you by Growth Gorilla. To find out how our marketing growth experts can boost your fintech's growth, head to growthgorilla.co.uk. And make sure to search for the FML podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Don't forget to click follow to ensure you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Growth Gorilla, thanks for listening.